Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining. We're back with FEO Tuesday Talks. This is Supply and Demand. I'm your moderator for today, Kyle Sipkens. Obviously, we're at a major point in history. After 2 years of ongoing history, we're entering into another period here, with the passing of Queen Elizabeth and entering into a new royal empire. But also 2 years of ongoing history in our industry and things constantly changing. We're obviously also at a time of transition where we're going from summer festivals into our fall festival season in Ontario. And Ontario has some incredible fall events celebrating the harvest and all the incredible fall colors that you can see throughout our amazing province. So I'm going to introduce our host or our guest for today in just a moment. But before that, again, I do want to just remind everyone that today's session is going to be recorded. So, excuse me, sorry. With that, I do want to introduce today's guest, who is Richard Anderson. He's with SmartServe Ontario. Richard, thanks for joining us. And I'm going to give you a moment to introduce yourself, because it's always a little bit more interesting to hear from you than to just hear from me going on and on.
Thanks, Kyle. Good morning, everybody. The first thing I will acknowledge is, yes, I did indeed watch the Queen's funeral. It was live streamed. So don't judge me, for those of you who probably have more important things to do.
You may be about like one of 4 or 5 billion people who watch.
Okay, good to know.
I think you're in good company. You're okay.
So my name is Richard Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of SmartServe Ontario. I may have met some of you at FEO conferences. My background, I worked for 25 years in post-secondary, where I was the campus license holder. And yes, there were many nights I didn't sleep thinking about how students were letting their hair down. So that's how I managed to get kind of thrown into the world of the licensee. I wear a couple of other hats, so I happen to be on the board of the Santa Music Festival, and I'm going to have a shout out here to Brent. Brent, I promise I'll do nothing bad. And I also wanted to shout out to Zach, who's our new marketing manager, who's watching me to hopefully learn some pointers. So over the last 5 years of being with SmartServe has been the most change we've ever seen in the alcohol space. And I'm going to attempt to kind of summarize that and bring you up to speed. So that's a little bit about me. And at the end, I have my email. You're more than welcome to reach out to me if you have any specific questions.
So if you haven't already checked your email or didn't know what today's session is about, obviously we're going to be talking about SmartServe and recertification and why we need to recertify. Because maybe like me, you've had your SmartServe for a number of years and it was just kind of a one and done. But now that's going to be changing. And obviously a lot has changed in SmartServe and what may be happening in your licensed areas. So Richard is going to be talking about that today, and he does have a presentation. So I think with that, Jay, we can probably bring up Richard's presentation, and Richard, you can take it away.
All right, thanks again, Kyle. And I'll be zinging through it. Jay's got control, so I'll be asking to move forward. So Jay, go ahead. There we go. So what are we going to talk about today? So I'm going to do a quick review of why we have SmartServe. Hopefully most of you are aware of why we do that. Next one, I'm going to share the most recent updates on the Liquor License and Control Act. And the AGCO sets those. So to be clear, my job and our job at SmartServe is to hopefully put them in simple terms for you to understand. A little highlight again of the course content and testing and how things have changed, and a little bit about our certification online account process, and recertification, what you need to know on what the process is. So SmartServe Ontario has been around since 1995, and 27 years if my math is correct. So we're responsible for developing a training program that helps licensees in the workforce with risk related to selling, serving, handling, and the new part, delivering alcohol. Obviously, we speak about your guest safety, those around them. We speak about liability, We want to reduce impaired driving and underage drinking. And we want to help servers identify and prevent high-risk situations. That's really what the basis of the course is. And we have, throughout the course, we offer you techniques and tips on how to handle difficult situations, difficult patrons, and really it's going to give you a baseline skill training on how to deal with patrons. So in 2019, it's kind of ironic, the Liquor License Control Act 2019 was not in effect until 2021. I would have probably put 21 on there, but before that, it was called the Liquor License Act, LLA. So now it's LLCA. Why is it called that? Well, in updating it, it was last updated in the 80s. It required a whole bunch of new information on with the government's modernization to liquor regulation. But it also now covers cannabis, and that's why it's been expanded. So the government, as I stated, made a ton of changes during COVID, which I think in the long run really was helpful to business. That's what its intent was, but it certainly is making alcohol much more available. Many changes in license type. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because it's really in depth. And I always recommend, if you're unsure about a license type for an event, the AGCO is really a good resource. Part of the new LLCA was a piece on social responsibility. And it speaks directly to the fact that as of July 1, 2022, a new SmartServe recertification requirement was introduced with a, we'll call it a grandfathering clause, but basically you have 1 year to get that recertification. So many people in the province right now currently are not certified and expired, but you have until next year, and I'll get into that in greater detail. So biggest changes, liquor takeout and delivery with food from eligible establishments. That was put into place right in the middle of COVID to allow restaurants the opportunity to sell liquor with their food, whether you popped in to grab a burger and you decided you wanted to take a bottle of beer home. But there were pretty stringent rules on how it had to be sealed, how it had to be sold. And then, Uber Eats and Skip the Dishes, their delivery drivers have to be SmartServe certified. And that has created a whole bunch of interesting things. In the early days, you had to order food. And, it didn't, or it happened on fairly regular occurrence that John would order a French fry and 24 beers so that he didn't have to go out. So, the rules have been fine-tuned a bit, but liquor delivery has become a bigger part of dining out and delivery. Farmers markets used to have limited alcohol available, and the way it was handled, you may find now, if you're interested in farmers markets and a participant, that you may now see beer, wine, and liquor, local microbreweries that are now able to sell their product. In the past, they weren't, so that's important to note. Liquor delivery service and storage. So it's important to note that there's a lot of requirement of the liquor delivery service, and you have to store the product properly. But perfect example is as the liquor delivery service, let's say I show up to the ABC hamburger company, and I, as the owner, am required to record your name, your date and time of delivery, what you're delivering, that you do indeed ID the individual at the other end, and how the alcohol has to be stored. So there are a lot of requirements there. Extended hours. So this was really interesting. Remember, in Ontario, it was always, you could go to a restaurant, order at 11 a.m., and last call was 2 a.m. So that changed and went all over the map during COVID, where you could then go into the grocery store at 7 in the morning and pick up your case of beer. How that came about is right in the middle of COVID, they would, grocery stores would allow 7 to 8 a.m. just for seniors. And of course, the seniors would go in and they weren't able to buy beer or alcohol. So the government extended that. So the retail hours have changed quite a bit, but they are much more broader and open, and they've been made permanent. Infused liquor, I won't get into that, but some people do barrel aging of beer as an example. You just now have to advise. The beverage limits for wine and brew pubs. So remember those Niagara winery tours where you were allowed to have a sample and it was 2 ounces? That limit has now been removed. They can give you 8 ounces, they can give you whatever. So it's important to note. But with all these changes, they're still responsible to ensure they don't overserve you and that you don't drink and drive. Take home the rest. If I decide that I want to bring in a bottle of wine, which kind of already existed in the past, they could recork it and you could bring it home. Now they're suggesting that recorking isn't secure enough. This one intrigues me. I don't know how you secure properly a bottle of wine or any other, but I think it has to be put into a different container. But those are some of the rules that won't necessarily affect you in your event because you're not necessarily the licensee. So delivery has been lowered to 18. So again, for consistency, if I'm an Uber Eats driver, if I'm delivering alcohol, I can be 18. So that was changed. This one is really interesting and I think may impact most of festivals and events in Ontario. If you have a caterer's endorsement, or if you have your own liquor license and you decide to do an outdoor tent, meals were always required. And now light meals are not required, which, you know, the premise of Smart Serve is that food slows down the metabolism of alcohol. Drinking on an empty stomach is much more troubling. So as much as this has changed, I would still highly recommend you have meals and light meals available to your patrons. Manufacturers have more flexibility on the retail store. So in the past, if I'm the microbrewery, I'm allowed to have a physical store, but I'm not allowed to move that physical store to another area, and this is allowing more flexibility there. And again, this may affect you if you're having an event and you want to have a microbrew be your sponsor, etc. This one's been around for a while, but you know, you can't promote immoderate consumption, and you can't display cross promotion. And the example they give is, you know, Red Bull was a huge thing, vodka and Red Bull. You can't display them in the same area, etc. So, you know, again, I'm not sure what this really does, but I don't think it's as big as it used to be. And there's much more. You know, if you're looking for a riveting reading experience, the Liquor License Act is important for you to have an understanding of. Okay, next it would be course content. And feel free to just plop them all up, Jay. So we always want to make sure that our course is current and relevant. And if you haven't taken it in the last 5 years, here's an overview, and I'm not going to get into it. The bottom line is there's 12 modules, various chapters, mini quizzes, role-playing activities. And I think the most important new additions, there's a module on cannabis and signs of intoxication and risk. And I think it's important that when cannabis was legalized, a lot of us were a little bit freaked out about how that could impact. So it's important to know that we have always, you know, made the connection to our servers to say intoxication is intoxication. Doesn't matter what they had before they came in the door. People were smoking cannabis and taking prescription medication way before some of it became legal. And it was always the server's responsibility to monitor the patron. And if they see there's a problem, cut them off, even if they've not served them. So that stands. And we also added a new module on sexual violence, and we do an overview of sexual harassment and drug facilitated sexual assault. This is very high level. You know, it's a 20-minute module, which doesn't do justice to the sexual harassment topic because it's much more in depth than that. But at the end of the day, if you're monitoring patients, patrons, you're obviously going to have you're going to see some things that maybe trouble you, and our intent is to educate you on what to do. So that's kind of the overview of the course. Course content, so it's fully translated in 6 languages. You can see English, French, Chinese, Korean, Punjabi, and Spanish. It's an online training course. I don't want to say only. So back in the day, a lot of people took it in class with their, I'll say if they worked in a business, usually you take it together with your coworkers. So the vast majority of our training, and certainly since COVID when no one was offering in class, is online, and it's available 24 hours a day. Takes about 4 hours. However, you can access the course content up to 30 days for purchase. You have as much time to go through it. We do have approved facilitators, but again, those numbers are limited. So there are a few that offer face-to-face and classroom style training, but I think it's really important that even though you're in class, your test is still done online. And that's up to the facilitator as to whether they have you all do it in class or whether you go home and do it. And we do have accessibility support for those that may have some challenges. All final tests are completed online only, as I mentioned. And when all the modules are complete, the final test is unlocked. You have 2 shots at taking the course. You must get 80% to pass. It is proctored, and this is important because some people get a little freaked out about it. So we want to validate that you are indeed the person who's taking the course and getting the certificate. It uses biometrics and artificial intelligence, so it's not human, and it monitors you. But perfect example is you're gonna hold up your ID to the camera. You're then gonna put your face in a square, and it's gonna double check to make sure it's the same person. You can use any device that has a camera or webcam, so you can do it on a small phone, etc. Those are some of the more recent changes. The test is multiple choice. When you are finished the test, your results are shown to you immediately, including telling you which questions you got incorrect. Test is not timed, but it's got to be completed in one session. And throughout, there's no aids allowed. So that's where you could get flagged by the proctoring if you're moving off the screen, if you hold up a book, if you open up another browser. Those are things that are monitored. Again, 80%, and there's no flags, then a certificate will be issued immediately. It's valid for 5 years from the date of issue. I think it's important to note that your certificate is now accessible on your online account. So many people who never had an online account, you can now log in, recreate, and your certificate is now an e-certificate. So it's a PDF, it's on your account, so you no longer need to request a card, and nor do we provide cards anymore. And you can upload it to your cell phone in case the liquor inspector asks or your employer asks. So we wanted to make that easier for everybody. I'm going to talk a little bit about how to manage your account and your certificate. So we stopped printing and mailing cards in October 2021. All current certificate holders have access to their e-certificate and smartcert.ca in your account. An online account is required. So we will have you on account, and it'll find you when you enter your name and date of birth, assuming it was given to us correctly in the first place. And again, it's right there. All new and existing certificates now have an expiry. So although you may have a card in your wallet that shows no expiry, if you log into your account, you'll now see that there is an expiry date on your card. And obviously, when we issued the cards, there wasn't a belief that recertification would be required, which is why it didn't have an expiry. So recertification, there's no question that with the change, with all the new laws, with the cannabis legalization, with delivery and sexual violence, that anybody who has a card older than 5 years is missing a lot of new key information to help them be a better server and to lower the risk. So that was AGCO's kind of approach to this. It's aligned with other provinces. We were one of the last provinces to do recertification. So we know that you have to recertify food handlers. There's a bunch of things that we're required to recertify. it wasn't unreasonable that this should be done. As I mentioned, July 1, 2022, but nothing expires for a year from now. So if you were issued a card on or after July 1, 2018, it will expire 5 years from the date of issue. If you were issued before July 1, 2018, you have until June 30th, 2023. And for those of you that may have taken before 1995, and there are some, it was a product called Server Intervention Program, or SIP. That is expired immediately, and you don't have the grandfathering there, so you need to get that up to speed as soon as possible. So there's only one SmartServe training course. Recertification is offered at a discounted fee. So it's $29.95, but it's key, you need to do it before it expires. So if you wait, you will be paying the full price, which is $44.95. So we encourage you to get it done at the reduced rate. You will be required to complete the entire course and the final test to renew your certificate for another 5 years. What should you do? So we encourage you and your teams to log in and register for your account and your certificate, download it onto your device, or you can reprint it if you like. Your current certificate will link you to your account. So if you run into problems, and there is the odd one that maybe wasn't on our system from 20 years ago, reach out, we'll help you make that connection. You do have to do a validation step. So I think you will get an email and you have to validate by clicking on it. It's your responsibility to recertify. The Alcohol and Gaming Commission is sending notifications out to licensees, and there's about 7,000 or 8,000 licensees in the province. They're responsible to ensure that their servers are certified. They're also responsible to ensure that they have copies of it. So that's kind of the angle that we're going to do. So if I show up to work and my hopefully supervisor says to me, hey, is your certificate up to date? Oh, it's not. Well, you better get recertified. And you'll see more social media and communication as we get closer to the July 1 deadline. Organizations, there's many out there that provide, we call it tokens or access to their staff and volunteers. There's no question that first time in 25 years, our price did go up this year, which I'm sure was a burden to many organizations as prices in general have gone up. We encourage you for recertification to tell the individual they're going to qualify for the reduced rate, whereas you as an organization aren't, because we don't know if you're giving that token to someone who's new or someone who is recertifying. So the best approach is for you to say, go take it, we'll reimburse you, assuming that's what your organization does for volunteers. From an organizational account, if you choose to go that way, you can buy the tokens, you can monitor redemption and completion, you can see a billing history. These are best for net new people, but I think it's really important to note that, you know, when you buy tokens, they're good for 30 days. So you don't want to be buying hundreds, only use 50, then you're going to lose out in 30 days. So it's really important that you buy as you need. There's no savings to be gathered by buying in bulk. And it says you will not be able to see an individual certificate number, but you can see the status of their course, whether they've finished. So useful links, obviously agco.ca, smartserve.ca recertification, etc. We have an FAQ on our website. Feel free to take a look at those links, and we're happy to answer any questions you might have if you can't get your answers there. Customer service, so there's our email, there's our phone number, there's my email. We have chat, email, or call our office, and we'll help walk you through it. And that's kind of it in the wonderful realm of SmartServe and recertification. Thanks for your time, and certainly happy to answer any questions you might have.
That's great, Richard. So definitely want to take down that contact information there to reach out if you do have any questions. But if you do have any questions today, please feel free to either just raise your hand. That option is at the bottom of your screen in reactions, or you can type your question into the chat and we'll be happy to look at those. Oh, it looks like we have one already. It looks like Gary has a question. So Gary, go ahead.
Yes, I was wondering if you could give me some feedback. We've had 2 or 3 people take the course, and when they've completed the assignment, both of them identically had 4 errors, and they weren't told what the errors were, and we're wondering if that is a flaw in the course, or can that be changed, because now they're living with this memory that they've got 4 errors and they have no idea what the errors are. So I'm they're kind of concerned about that. And wondering if
so when you say errors, are you saying that they got 4 questions wrong? Is that what you meant?
Exactly, that's right. Yeah,
Yeah,
when they
so
completed the course, they had
Sure.
4 questions wrong,
Yeah.
and there was no indication of what the errors were, just that
Okay.
they had 4 errors wrong, 4 questions wrong.
Sure. How long ago did they write it, Gary?
One was last week, and one was about 2 months ago.
Okay. So definitely that is not the norm. Upon finishing, the pop-up will tell you what your score is, and it'll immediately tell you what questions you got incorrect. So the fact, if they did not see it, I think it may be ambiguous on how it pops up, because I think a lot of people will just click next to see final score, so they may have missed it, but it definitely is part of our process for them to see. And they also are welcome to call our office to say, hey, I got 4 questions wrong. We'll always take the time to walk through them with you to clarify if there's questions.
Thank you very much. I will advise them.
Perfect.
That's great. Thanks, Gary. And Megan had a question as well in the chat asking for Richard's contact information. So Jay has popped that into the chat function as well, so you can write it down from there. If you have any other questions, please feel free to, again, either raise your hand or put it in the chat. Richard, I had a question for you. I was wondering, for anyone who maybe is wondering, maybe they don't remember the date that they certified, how would somebody know whether or not, what the date was and whether they will need to recertify right now?
Yeah, it's fairly simple. You're going to go on to our website. You're going to register your account. It's going to ask you for your date of birth, your name, if you have your certificate number, and it's going to find you in the database. It's going to allow you to create an account where you can see your certificate online with an expiry date. So it's fairly straightforward. The only thing that sometimes we're seeing is someone may have used an email address 10, 15 years ago that they don't remember or use anymore. But once they do the login, they'll find their information fairly quickly. And again, if they have any challenges, if they call our office, we'll walk them through that process.
Great. And Dave has a question as well before we jump to another question in the chat.
Sure.
And Richard, might be a multiple part question, but I, like you, have had my name on liquor licenses and have been up a lot of nights hoping that everything goes well.
Yeah.
But for those of us that do have an alcohol component to our festivals, and we decide to go and get a service club, for example, a Lions Club, to run your beer tent for you, it doesn't dissolve us as a board of all of the AGCO rules and everything just because we've farmed out the alcohol portion or taken a percentage of sales. Is that correct in my assumption there?
Yeah, that's a great point, Jay. I think doing your due diligence is really important. So if you do decide to sub it out, do your due diligence. Ask them for a copy of their certificate and their liability insurance. Ask them if people are SmartServe trained. In other words, don't just hand it over because you trust them. You need to make sure that all that stuff is in place, because if that club or that third party overserves someone and there's an incident that involves an injury or a death, the festival, the event is going to be sued along with the server, along with the licensee. So do your due diligence, make sure they're the right partner and that they have a good history of service.
Great question, Dave.
Thank you.
So Megan Hooper from City of Cambridge had a question of how is the public being made aware that SmartServe has recertification happening now?
Yeah, absolutely. So good old social media. So here's the thing I learned. How many of you are aware of the anti-spam legislation? So we are not allowed to email our certificate holders because we did not ask for their permission to do so. So that's a bit of an annoyance. So I can't email you. Anybody who's new to our course is giving us consent. So moving forward is great. History, unfortunately not. So we're dependent on the Alcohol and Gaming Commission is making a communication to licensees, but it's mostly social media. I think you're going to find that in SmartServe's case, we're going to wait till the second quarter of 23 to really push it home through various public relation approaches, media releases, that kind of stuff. So it's not going to be perfect. Right now, we're attending bar and restaurant shows, etc. We're talking with people. So, you know, word of mouth, social media, and some communications coming out from the Alcohol and Gaming Commission, hoping that between all of them, that will reach the majority. I do find with this industry, licensees are very aware of the requirement and will be aware, and they're required to make sure that their staff and servers are up to speed. So it's not perfect system by any means, but we're hoping that all those combined will make a difference and get the message out.
And Adriana also added a note that depending on the age of your certificate or card, it's also located at the bottom of the card. I think that's the expiry date there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So Richard, you mentioned during the presentation, and this might be getting into some of the specifics, which I know you might not be able to comment on, but you mentioned about new rules regarding delivery and storage. Would that impact, say, like a festival holding the event and receiving delivery of alcohol and how they're storing it?
So the short answer is no. I don't think there's, this is really the licensee who decides that they want to provide a delivery service. So I'm not aware of any event or festival that is providing delivery of alcohol as part of their event. I think most have enough to worry about with patrons that's not something they'd want to do. So unless you do want to go into that, then I would just do your homework, because it is a different license that's required to do that. So the vast majority of events wouldn't require to even be knowledgeable of that. It's mostly restaurants and bars, etc.
Right. And Debbie had a question as well. Based on Dave's earlier question, working with a hotel, does that apply as well?
Yeah, so if a hotel wants to offer delivery from their lounge, etc., or even, so they can already deliver to someone in their hotel, of course, but if they want to allow someone to come to the bar and ask to take alcohol out, or if they want to be able to deliver it in the community, absolutely, they have to have clear processes in place, a different license, different storage. And I think the other key is that they have to document deliveries very clearly, what went out, what time, who was the driver, did they have or the delivery agent, do they have SmartServe? So there is a lot more responsibility on the licensee if they choose to do that.
Right. And for festivals specifically, obviously anyone actually serving alcohol would require SmartServe, but would, say, the festival organizers require it? Would the board members require it? Like, can you comment on that at all?
Yeah, so the Alcohol and Gaming Commission does not require management or board to be SmartServe certified. And in fact, and I always found this one kind of weird, the person that applies for the special occasion permit isn't even required to be SmartServe trained. However, all the servers are, and highly recommended that your security people are. Anybody who sells, serves, or handles alcohol has to be certified. So let's say that I decide to apply for a special occasion permit, but I'm not handling alcohol. I'm not serving, and I find it highly unusual. If you're the licensee of that event, you're likely hands-on, and I think it's important that you're hands-on so that you can see what the staff is doing. You have a view on how things are going. Should an incident occur, that you are proactive and that you have policies and processes in place. So I think it's important, but from a mandatory perspective, servers, handlers, those that are clearing tables, those that are taking empty bottles and cans off tables, those are the ones that are required to be certified.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure most people are familiar with on the call, but that also extends to volunteers who are serving alcohol, or even anyone handing out sampling, like as a promotion on site.
Yeah, absolutely. The best example is when sampling. Absolutely, if you go to the liquor LCBO right now, you'll go in and sometimes you'll see them doing sampling there. Those people are Smart Serve trained and are required to have that. So, anytime there's a touching point, and I think it's just good common risk management. We know that from a risk management perspective, the minute you serve alcohol, you put yourself in a whole different kind of realm from needing to have, alcohol liability insurance. Like, it's a whole different thing, and it does raise the risk for any event that offers alcohol. So do your due diligence, make sure your people are trained, have clear policies and processes. Those are all things that will be called into play should an incident occur and there be a lawsuit. So it's important to be proactive.
Absolutely. And Jay mentioned to follow Smart Serve Ontario on all social media platforms so that you get aware of
Yes,
updates.
we always put pearls of wisdom out there for everybody.
And Zach from Smart Serve also shared a recertification support PDF. So you can click that link as well and make sure to save that. Dave has a question. So over to you, Dave.
And Richard, one of your things in your presentation talked about cannabis, and you and I have been on many panels in the past about this, and I don't think a whole lot has changed in that realm. Can you speak to a bit of that? And I always use your example of impaired is impaired. And when it became legal, a lot of the festivals wanted to jump on the bandwagon and include it in their offering somehow, but you still can't do alcohol and cannabis at the same time, right? It's one or the other. Or has any of that stuff changed?
Yeah, so it's a real convoluted. So it's handled by Health Canada. It's enforced by each province. I've seen events where there's a licensed area, and then in the licensed area is a separate area just for cannabis. It requires some really smart people to help you manage it. And I think the biggest issue is, cannabis has changed since 2019, right? You had a ton of people getting into the market. We're now at a saturation phase. Those of you who may have bought into cannabis stocks probably lost your shirt because the sales aren't quite there. There's an overabundance of suppliers. So in the early days, they were throwing money at festivals, and but a lot of festivals were weary about doing it. So I would say that do your due diligence, make sure your board supports it. No, you can't be cross-consuming, Dave. That if there's a cannabis area where they're smoking it, for example, and then they're going into the liquor license area, it has to be separate. I think it's also really important to note that I think the vast majority, or stats are proving the vast majority, are not smoking cannabis. They are consuming it, whether it's edibles, whether it's infused, whether it's gummies, whether it's vaping. That seems to be, the choice of most people when it comes to cannabis. So bear that in mind, that they're not going to smell like, skunk, as we laugh, right? They're not going to have that smell. So I think, do your due diligence. If someone's throwing money at you to set up a booth, there's a lot of rules and regs that have to come into play. And again, that's separate from the AGCO. So, just make sure you do your homework.
And again, just going down that same line with the cannabis and the infused food and the culinary aspect, it's a difficult proposition because technically you can only get cannabis from a legal distributor. And if most chefs I know aren't legal distributors, so how could you actually run one of those culinary infused events?
Yeah, and I'll be honest, that's not my space. I am aware of companies that do it, so they do buy it legally, and then therefore are able to use it in their cooking procedures. So there is a method that they can do it. I'm not sure what the licensing requirement is, but there are companies that all they do is, I've heard of weddings where they have a bud tender and they have a bar and they have a cannabis, and the cannabis areas are really intriguing people in a lot of cases, outselling or out serving the alcohol. So it's definitely coming of age. People are more interested in trying it. But I think, we always said when cannabis came out, low and slow was really important, because when you have 100 years of alcohol, we all, those of us that drink alcohol, have a pretty good understanding of, what your threshold is and when you feel like you've had too much. And that isn't the case for cannabis. People are learning, trying to understand how it interacts in their body, how many milligrams of cannabis oil or THC or CBD. So there lies the problem, that someone, the ever popular, hey, I ate a cookie and I don't feel anything, so I'm going to eat a second cookie. Well, we know the cookie can take 20 to 40 minutes. So it's all those factors that all of a sudden you could just be hit pretty hard. And at the end of the day, if you're in a licensed area and you're seeing someone who's, showing clear signs of intoxication, that, you have to make sure you take the appropriate approach to ensure this person stop serving them, get them home safely, etc.
Dave, thank you for bringing up this topic. This was something I wanted to get to as well. I do have a question, but Debbie, go ahead with your question.
Yeah, I'm just, what do you cover under the sexual abuse? What do you cover under that training? And you said it's only 20 minutes about?
Yes.
And are there other recommendations that you have to get more in-depth understanding and training on that?
For sure. So, we speak a lot about drug facilitated sexual violence. We educate on what is sexual violence, what is sexual harassment. And there's no question, it all comes down to any unwanted sexual advances or touching. And it's regardless of age, it's regardless of sex. And I think it's important that, servers are taught to say, hey, if there's an interaction going on, we've heard stories about people that have had their beverages drugged. We've heard stories of servers who have witnessed it and didn't know how to handle it. So the intent of that module is to make sure there's a conversation about how do we handle this? If you're in doubt, what should you do? Has the management team had a conversation with you about how do we handle this? When do we call the police? That kind of stuff. So again, there are many other much more intensive courses. There are organizations that will come into your workplace and do, a full day training, bystander training, etc. So this is just, again, meant to say, here's some obvious things that you may see, and let's not ignore it. Let's respond. How do you notify your security? How do you deal with, those instances? So that's kind of the high level summary of what it is. And then we give 3 or 4 scenarios for you to kind of judge what you would have done and maybe what you could have done differently.
Mm-hmm. And the introduction of training like this is so important. I know, having worked in bars and alcohol spaces myself, the ability to recognize those warning signs and intervene can make a huge difference in someone's life. So it's really important, and a responsibility that we take on. So I did want to quickly jump back to cannabis before jumping to Dave's question, because we're now a few years into legalization, and I remember at FEO Festival, before legalization was coming up, festival organizers were really scrambling to learn as much as they can about how this may impact. Now that we're a few years into it, I wonder if you can just kind of comment on, how that kind of integration has gone, what, maybe some of the initial fears were, and, where we're at now.
Sure. I may defer it because it's not a space that I'm terribly active in anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So let me first clarify that anybody who sells and handles cannabis in Ontario has to take a course called CanSell. CanSell is administered by not SmartServe. It's a separate entity, and it really goes in depth into cannabis and production. It talks a lot about CBD and talks a lot about THC, how it impacts the body, etc. Very minimal on responsible service, although there is some in there. So I think that, we were all gung-ho in the festival world thinking we're going to have, get thousands of dollars in sponsorship money, and we're going to bring in these companies. But Health Canada said, no promotion, no marketing, no signage. So you might see an unbranded tent sitting somewhere in a fenced off area. They're not allowed to say brought to you by Tweed. Once you go in, you then would understand that it's cannabis, but then they're not allowed to market their brand. Like, it was so ambiguous and ridiculous. It's evolved now that you may get the local store wanting to come to your event and talk about what they do, but they're very limited on their, marketing and advertising abilities. So, I would say if that's something you want to look at, definitely do your homework. I certainly can't offer much more than that, but I can speak from experience in some of the festivals that I've worked with. Very few have gone down the cannabis trail. They just don't see it as a good mesh with their event per se.
That's great. Thank you. Dave, over to you with your question.
Yeah, Richard, for your licensees or for festivals that are running their own tents and stuff like that, what's the responsibility of your servers having their smart serve on their person or in a file with the organizer? Does the AGCO give you a certain amount of time to prove that that everybody's certified, or do you have to have that certification on file with you all the time?
Yeah, so as a server or anybody who's in the alcohol realm, you are required to have your certificate on your person. If the a liquor inspector shows up and shows their badge, expresses who they are, and asks you for smart serve, and you don't produce it, there could be repercussions. Now, they're not necessarily that difficult to deal with, because they want to make sure that everybody's working together well, etc. But if they see some concern and ask, and you don't have it. Now, having said that, they have the ability to enter your name and see if you're certified. So there are times when people will lie. Of course I'm certified, and here's my name and date of birth. They can check it, and they can know relatively quickly if you aren't. If you aren't, yes, you can be charged, and so can your licensee. So what does that mean? It's the licensee's responsibility to ensure that it's a valid certificate. It's important from an organizational perspective that the manager or licensee have copies. It's not a requirement, but certainly if you are inspected and you can open up your binder and say, here's everybody that works for me, and a lot of managers do that and find it to be very proactive. So I definitely would recommend that. But it's not a requirement. But what it does show to the inspector is you're organized, you know who your team is, you are managing their certificates, you are ensuring that they're valid and up to date.
And Richard, I know the AGCO has inspectors available in whatever region you are to come out and speak to your volunteers or to your group if you're thinking of getting into that space. Does SmartServe have similar arrangements that they can go and speak to a group?
So I'm going to say yes and no. We're a small organization. We don't have the ability to travel the province, but certainly if a team or a group wanted to have a conversation with us, we do a lot of work with all the various associations. We don't do the training ourselves. Example, if someone wants to do in class, we have approved facilitators throughout the province. So we're certainly open to have a conversation if that's what you'd like. But certainly we don't, like the Alcohol and Gaming Commission, their inspectors are in each region. We don't necessarily have that capability. But, if you have a request, we're always open to considering it for sure.
That's great. And we are entering into the final moments of the session today. So if you do have any other questions, please feel free to raise your hand. But before we go into what people can look forward to in our next session, I just wanted to give an opportunity for Richard. Do you have any final thoughts, anything that you wanted to share?
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. Just wish everyone best of luck in their events and activities. If they've happened already, I hope they were successful. And as we move into the fall, I wish you the best. I will be at the conference in March, so happy to answer any questions you may have. And thanks for your time today.
Thank you so much, Richard, and looking forward to seeing you at the conference and seeing everyone else in person. It may have been a while since we've seen each other last. But Dave, I wanted to bring you in as well. because our next session is going to be with Dave and Tina. And I wanted to just give an opportunity for you to share what people can expect from the next session.
Yeah, I think it's just going to be a sort of state of the nation, where we're at, some trends that we're seeing, hopefully getting some feedback from other people about things that they're seeing out there, because, you know, I think it's important that we all network and share what we've been up against, and you know, things for others to look out for if their events are coming up. You know, with the getting back together, there are all kinds of different things that we talked about, and you know, some festivals are seeing record crowds coming out, but the revenues aren't showing up, or the expenses have really, you know, ballooned, and the revenues that you once had are not there anymore. So, you know, kind of sort of sharing a state of the nation's thing to look out for. Hopefully give you some sneak peeks of what's coming up for the conference, and what we've got in store for the next year or so, and sharing the stage with our new president, Tina Myers, and just looking forward for that open dialogue, really.
So that will be a really important conversation to join, really to see where our industry is at. So hopefully we'll see you at the next session. In the meantime, once again, thank you so much, Richard, for joining us today. Thank you to Jay and Debbie, and to Dave, and to everyone behind the scenes for making it happen, and to everyone here today for joining us. So we hope that we'll see you at the next session. In the meantime, I'm Kyle. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.